I'm going to share with you some questions which I consider to be classic non-calculator questions which I feel a student who's aiming for grade 7 to 9 should learn and learn very well and practice and prepare for. Before I begin, it's worth noting that not all the questions that are on the calculator paper need to be done with a calculator. There are plenty of non-calculator questions which have appeared on the calculator papers, meaning we've never really had to use a calculator when doing those questions. So questions such as these can easily appear on a paper that is exclusively non-calculator. Some of these topics are, for example, sectors. You could be asked to find the area of a sector, but the angle that you're given can be divided by the 360 and that fraction can be simplified. So when you multiply with your pi r squared, where the r, the radius, is a number that can also be squared and cancelled down further, it can be done totally without the use of a calculator. Another topic which I've seen come up on the calculator papers is parallel and perpendicular lines. Very rarely when doing these questions, you've had to use a calculator. It's usually find the gradient, do the negative reciprocal if it's perpendicular, and then plug it in to find the equation. Never have to use a calculator, but seen on previous past exam papers which are calculator. There are plenty of others, but I'll give you a few more. You got Pythagoras and trigonometry. Usually these questions heavily involve the use of a calculator, particularly trigonometry. But you could be given a triangle and have to use the trigonometric ratios, where you're replacing certain values such as cos 60 or tan 30 or whatever, and you can do the whole process without needing a calculator. However, I'm still going to share with you some questions which I consider to be classic non-calculator questions which I feel a student who's aiming for grade 7 to 9 should learn and learn very well and practice and prepare for. And these are in no particular order. I've just listed them down. So number one, we have surds. Make sure you know how to break down the surds, learn how to rationalize, particularly when you have a denominator which has a sign in the middle. Make sure you change that sign when you're multiplying the numerator and denominator. And of course, this process will have the method of expanding brackets where you have surds. So get plenty of practice of knowing when to get rid of that square root and when to include it still. Number two, recurring decimals to fractions. Very popular on the non-calculator paper, so get plenty of practice on those questions. Number three, simultaneous equations. Another classical one. This is why I call this list the classical non-calculator topics, because these questions are so frequent on the non-calculator papers. With the simultaneous equations, there are two types. The most common one is where you're using the method of elimination, where you're making the x values the same. Perhaps you have to multiply one of the equations by something, eliminate the x or the y, whatever you are choosing to make the same. Find that value, substitute it in and find the other value. One thing I would say about that is make sure you do the check method, where once you find your x value and your y value, you're substituting them back into the equation that you didn't use, and the left-hand side should be equal to the right-hand side, telling you that you've done it correctly, i.e. found the correct values. The other type of simultaneous equation that you could be asked for is where you have one which is linear and one which is a quadratic. So you're taking the linear one, perhaps making something the subject, if it's not already done for you in a nice way, and then substitute it into the quadratic one. Number four, we have completing the square. With completing the square, remember, the coefficient of x squared has to be 1 before you start the method of completing the square. If there's a number in front of the x squared, remember you have to factorize it out. And don't forget to divide by all the terms. And remember to deal with that, whatever you took out at the end, by multiplying it back. And completing the square questions can usually be followed up by finding the turning point, which is the minus p, q. So just take your value of p, take your value of q, and put it into that coordinate bracket. Just don't forget that the p has the opposite sign. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the p and q, some of you guys might have used different letters, but it's all the same thing. Number five, indices. Now, if you're aiming for grade 7, 8 and 9, you're going to know what to do when you're multiplying and you're dividing. The one to look out for, however, is the one with the brackets. Sometimes students forget that that power outside the bracket affects everything inside the bracket. So for example, if you have, let's say, 2x to the power of 6 in a bracket, to the power of 3, some students deal with the power of, x to the power of 6 by multiplying the 6 and the 3, but they forget that the 2 is also affected by that 3. So you have to do 2 cubed as well, giving you 8x to the power of 18. Number 6, functions. Get plenty of practice on composite functions, inverse functions, and solving functions. A reminder here is when you have a composite function, remember that the letter that's next to the bracket is what you use first, the function that you use first. And whatever the outcome of that is, you put into the other one. Number 7, negative enlargement. Now the 4 transformations are relatively easy. You've got your translation, reflection, rotation, and enlargement. But the negative enlargement really catches some students out. Remember, it's going the opposite way from the center of enlargement. So multiply by whatever scale factor and go in the opposite directions. So if you're going up, remember to go down. If you're going left, you're going right. And sometimes they can throw in a scale factor, which is a fraction, which makes the shape smaller. Number 8, algebraic fractions. Usually these questions are towards the end of the paper and you have several types. You could have a question where you are factorizing the numerator and the denominator and then cancelling out, or you could have 2 fractions using algebra and you have to make the denominators the same by cross multiplying or whatever. These questions are also popular with when you have to solve algebraic fractions. So get plenty of practice on those. Number 9, ratios. Now ratios has really transformed in recent years. It's not how it used to be in the exam papers, maybe let's say, 10 years ago. Nowadays, we don't really know what to expect with ratio questions. But what I have seen is a common theme of ratio questions where you have 2 different ratios and you're trying to compare them. Look out for the one that is common to both of them, and this is the one that you're trying to find the lowest common multiple of. Get practicing with plenty of practice questions from past exam papers and resources. Like I said, we don't really know what to expect with ratio questions. Often they can come up and even throw us teachers off. But the more you practice, the better you'll get at this and know the steps and the common things that you need to do with it. Finally, number 10, circle theorems. Where would we be without a circle theorem question on a non-calculator paper? Now, this is where you've learned all your theorems and it's about recognizing them and applying them. Now, one piece of advice I'd like to give you with circle theorems is if you come across a question and you can't see the theorem that you should apply straight away, it might help you if you tilt your head to the side or turn the page, because we've been learning the theorems in a certain orientation. So for example, the angle at the center is twice the angle at the circumference, and we've been shown it in that way. So it might be this way and you have to see it like that. So that really helps, if you just turn the page or tilt your head to the side. There are no particular circle theorems that I would say learn these over the others. All I would say is learn all of them and get plenty of practice on them. I hope these tips help you guys. One thing you must remember, however, is that you can't just get a grade 7, 8 and 9 by answering grade 7, 8 and 9 questions. You've got to get a particular amount of marks on the paper to get those grades, which means that you've got to be able to do the earlier questions as well, provided that the harder questions are at the end. So those questions are usually questions that the high ability students often neglect. Easy questions that you seem to think. Fractions, the prime factors, all of those percentage questions. Make sure you get plenty of practice on those questions as well. I hope this video helps you. Until the next one, bye for now and all the best with your exams.